Hello, Internet! I'm a few minutes early, but that's okay, because the munchkins are ready, and I'm ready, and the book is ready, and my dinner's in the oven, and I kind of want to get this done before it comes out of the oven so that I can eat my dinner when this is over with. So, we are ready for Chapter 5 of the Scarecrow. One of my munchkins just disappeared.
He's getting a drink.
He knew we were starting, so he's like, well, I guess I'm leaving, Dad. That's fun. You needed a drink after I started. Of course. He didn't need one before I started. As soon as I started, he had to walk out of the room. Because that's how we do things. We are ready for Chapter 5 of The Scarecrow of Oz. Chapter 5 is entitled The Little Old Man of the Island. If you'll recall, 2 nights ago, last time I read, sorry about last night, I was not feeling well. They flew out of the bottom of basically a well. And they saw a little building. So they are going to approach the building, and apparently that's where they will find the little old man of the island. Let's find out what this is about. A few steps brought them to the shed, which was merely a row of boughs built over a square space with some branches of trees fastened to the sides to keep off the wind. The front was quite open and faced the sea, and as our friends came nearer, they observed a little man with a long pointed beard sitting motionless on a stool and staring thoughtfully out over the water. "Get out of the way, please," he called in a fretful voice. "Can't you see you're obstructing my view?" "Good morning," said Cap'n Bill politely. "It isn't a good morning," snapped the little man. "I've seen plenty of mornings better than this, and you call it a good morning when I'm pestered with such a crowd as you?" Trot was astonished to hear such words from a stranger whom they had greeted quite properly, and Cap'n Bill grew red at the little man's rudeness. But the sailor said, in a quiet tone of voice, "Are you the only one as lives on this here island?" "Your grammar's bad," was the reply. "But this is my own exclusive island, and I'll thank you to get off it as soon as possible." "Well, we'd like to do that," said Trot, and then she and Cap'n Bill turned away and walked down to the shore to see if there was any other land in sight. The little man rose and followed them, although both were now too provoked to pay any attention to him. "Nothing in sight, partner," reported Cap'n Bill, shading his eyes with his hand. "So we'll have to stay here for some time, anyhow. It isn't a bad place, Trot, by any means." "That's all you know about it," broke in the little man. "The trees are altogether too green, and the rocks are harder than they ought to be. I find the sand very grainy, and the water dreadfully wet. Every breeze makes a drought, and the sun shines in the daytime when there's no need of it, and disappears just as soon as it begins to get dark. If you remain here, you'll find the island very unsatisfactory." Trot turned to look at him, and her sweet face was grave and curious. "I wonder who you are," she said. "My name is Pessum," said he with an air of pride. "I'm called the Observer." "Oh, well, what do you observe?" asked the little girl. "Everything I see," was the reply in a more surly tone. Then Pessum drew back with a startled exclamation and looked at some footprints in the sand. "Why, good gracious me!" he cried in distress. "What's the matter now?" asked Cap'n Bill. "Someone has pushed the earth in. Don't you see it?" "It isn't pushed in far enough to hurt anything," said Cap'n Bill, examining the footprints. "Everything hurts that isn't right," insisted the man. "If the earth were pushed in a mile, it'd be a great calamity, now wouldn't it?" "Well, I suppose so," admitted the little girl. "Well, here it's pushed in a full inch, and that's a 1/12 of a foot, or a little more than a millionth part of a mile, and therefore it's a millionth part of a calamity. Oh dear, how dreadful!" said Pessum in a wailing voice. "Try to forget it, sir," advised Cap'n Bill soothingly. "It's beginning to rain. Let's get you under your shed and keep dry." "Raining? Is it really raining?" asked Pessum, beginning to weep. "It is," answered Cap'n Bill as the drops began to descend. "And I don't see any way to stop it, although I'm some observer myself." "No, we can't stop it, I fear," said the man. "Are you very busy just now?" "I won't be after I get to the shed," replied the sailor man. "Then do me a favor, please," begged Pessum, walking briskly along behind them, for they were hastening to the shed. "Depends on what it is," said Cap'n Bill. "I wish you would take my umbrella down to the shore and hold it over the poor fishes till it stops raining. I'm afraid they'll get wet," said Pessum. Trot laughed, but Cap'n Bill thought the little man was poking fun at him, so he scowled upon Pessum in a way that showed he was angry. They reached the shed before getting very wet, although the rain was now coming down in big drops. The roof of the shed protected them, and while they stood watching the rainstorm, something buzzed in and circled around Pessum's head. At once the observer began beating it away with his hands, crying out, "A bumblebee! A bumblebee! The queerest bumblebee I ever saw!" Cap'n Bill and Trot both looked at it, and the little girl said in a surprise, "Dear me, it's a wee little orc." "That's what it is, sure enough," exclaimed Captain Bill. Really, it wasn't much bigger than a big bumblebee, and when it came toward Trot, she allowed it to alight on her shoulder. "It's me, all right," said a very small voice in her ear, "but I'm in an awful pickle just the same." "What, are you our orc, then?" demanded the girl, much amazed. "What's happened to you?" asked the sailor, putting his head close to Trot's shoulder in order to hear the reply better. Pessum also put his head close, and the orc said, "You will remember that when I left you I started to fly over the trees. Just as I got to the side of the forest, I saw a bush that was loaded down with the most luscious fruit you can imagine. The fruit was about the size of a gooseberry and of a lovely lavender color, so I swooped down and picked off one in my bill and ate it. At once I began to grow small, and I could feel myself shrinking away, and it frightened me terribly, so that I alighted on the ground to think over what was happening. In a few seconds I had shrunk to the size you now see me. But there I remain, getting no smaller indeed, but no larger. It is certainly a dreadful affliction. After I had recovered somewhat from the shock, I began to search for you. It is not so easy to find one's way when a creature is so small, but fortunately I spied you here in this shed. Came to at once." Cap'n Bill and Trot were much astonished at this story, and felt grieved for the poor orc. But the little man Pessum seemed to think it was a good joke. He began laughing when he heard the story, and laughed until he choked, after which he lay down on the ground and rolled and laughed again, while the tears of merriment coursed down his wrinkled cheeks. "Oh dear," he finally gasped, sitting up and wiping his eyes. "This is too rich. It's almost too joyful to be true." "Well, I don't see anything funny about it," remarked Trot indignantly. "You would if you had my experience," said Pessum, getting up on his feet, and gradually resuming his solemn and dissatisfied expression of countenance. "The same thing happened to me." "Oh, did it? And how did you happen to come to this island?" asked the little girl. "I didn't come. The neighbors brought me," replied the little man with a frown at the recollection. "They said I was quarrelsome and fault-finding, and blamed me because I told them all the things that went wrong or never were right, and because I told them how things ought to be, so they brought me here and left me all alone, saying that I quarreled with myself, no one else would make me unhappy. Absurd, wasn't it?" "Seems to me," said Cap'n Bill, "those neighbors did the proper thing." "Well," resumed Pessum, "when I found myself king of this island, I was obliged to live upon fruits. Found many fruits growing up here that I had never seen before. I tasted several and found them good and wholesome, but one day I ate a lavender berry as the orc did, and immediately I grew so small that I was scarcely 2 inches high. It was a very unpleasant condition. Just like the orc, I became frightened. I could not walk very well, nor very far, for every lump of earth in my way seemed a mountain, every blade of grass a tree, and every grain of sand a rocky boulder. For several days I stumbled around in agony and fear. Once a tree toad nearly gobbled me up, and if I ran out from the shelter of the bushes and gulls, and cormorants swooped down upon me. Finally, I decided to eat another berry and became nothing at all. Since life, to one as small as I was, had become such a dreary nightmare. At last I found a small tree that I thought bore the same fruit as I had eaten. The berry was dark purple instead of light lavender, but otherwise it was quite similar. Being unable to climb the tree, I was obliged to wait underneath it until a sharp breeze arose, shook the limbs so the berry fell. Instantly I seized it, and taking the last view of the world, as then I thought, I ate the berry in a twinkling. Then, to my surprise, it began to grow big again, till I became of my former stature, and so I have since remained. Needless to say, I have never eaten again of the lavender fruit, nor do any of the beasts or birds that live upon this island eat it." They had all three listened eagerly to this amazing tale, and when it was finished, the orc exclaimed, "Do you think, then, that the deep purple berry is the antidote for the lavender one?" "Oh, I'm sure of it," answered Pessum. "Then lead me to the tree at once." "Then lead me to the tree at once," begged the orc, "for this tiny form I have now terrifies me greatly." Pessum examined the orc closely. "Well, you're ugly enough as you are," said he. "Were you any larger, you might be dangerous." "Oh, no, no," Trot assured him. "The orc has been our good friend. Please take us to the tree." Then Pessum consented, although rather reluctantly. He led them to the right, which was the east side of the island, and in a few minutes brought them near the edge of the grove which faced the shore of the ocean. Here stood a small tree bearing berries of a deep purple color. The fruit looked very enticing, and Cap'n Bill reached up and selected one that seemed especially plump and ripe. The orc had remained perched upon Trot's shoulder, but now it flew down to the ground. It was so difficult for Cap'n Bill to kneel down with his wooden leg that the little girl took the berry from him, and held it close to the orc's head. "It's too big to get in my mouth," said the little creature, looking at the fruit sidewise. "You'll have to make several mouthfuls of it, I guess," said Trot, and that is what the orc did. He pecked at the soft, ripe fruit with his bill and ate it up very quickly, because it was good. Even before he had finished the berry, they could see the orc begin to grow. In a few minutes, he had regained his natural size and was struggling before them, quite delighted with his transformation. "Well, well, what do you think of me now?" he asked proudly. "You are very skinny and remarkably ugly," declared Pessim. "You're a poor judge of orcs," was the reply. "Anyone can see that I'm much handsomer than those dreadful things called birds, which are all fluff and feathers." "Well, their feathers make soft beds," asserted Pessim. "And my skin would make an excellent drumhead," retorted the orc. "Nevertheless, a plucked bird or a skinned orc would be of no value to himself, so we needn't brag about our usefulness after we're dead. But for the sake of argument, friend Pessim, I'd like to know what good you would be, were you not alive." "Never mind that," said Cap'n Bill. "He isn't much good as he is." "I'm the king of this island, allow me to say, and you're intruding on my property," declared the little man, scowling upon them. "If you don't like me, and I'm sure you don't, for no one else does, why don't you go away and leave me to myself?" "Well, the orc can fly and we can't," explained Trot in an answer. "Well, we don't want to stay here a bit, but I don't see how we can get away." "You can go back into the hole where you came from." Cap'n Bill shook his head. Trot shuddered at the thought, and the orc laughed aloud. "You may be king here," the creature said to Pessim, "but we intend to run this island to suit ourselves. For we are three and you are one. The balance of power lies with us." The little man made no reply to this, although as they walked back to the shed, his face wore its fiercest scowl. Cap'n Bill gathered a lot of leaves and, assisted by Trot, prepared 2 nice beds in opposite corners of the shed. Pessim slept in a hammock where he swung between 2 trees. They required no dishes, as all their food consisted of fruits and nuts picked from the trees. They made no fire, for the weather was warm and there was nothing to cook. The shed had no furniture other than the rude stool where the little man was accustomed to sit upon. He called it his throne, and they let him keep it. So they lived upon the island for 3 days, and rested and ate to their heart's content. Still, they were not at all happy in this life because of Pessim. He continually found fault with them and all that they did, and all their surroundings. He could see nothing good or admirable in all the world, and Trot soon came to understand why the little man's former neighbors had brought him to this island and left him there, all alone, so they could not annoy anyone. It was their misfortune that they had been led to this place by their adventures, for often they would have preferred the company of a wild beast to that of Pessim. On the 4th day, a happy thought came to the orc. They had all been racking their brains for a possible way to leave the island, and discussing this or that method without finding a plan that was practical. Cap'n Bill had said he could make a raft of the trees big enough to float them all, but he had no tools except those 2 pocket knives, and it was not possible to chop down trees with such small blades. "And suppose we got afloat on the ocean," said Trot. "Where could we drift to, and how long would it take us to get there?" Cap'n Bill was forced to admit he didn't know. The orc could fly away from the island any time it wished to, but the queer creature was loyal to his new friends and refused to leave them in such a lonely, forsaken place. It was when Trot urged him to go on this 4th morning that the orc had this happy thought. "I will go," said he, "and if you 2 will agree to ride upon my back." "Oh, we're too heavy, you might drop us," objected Cap'n Bill. "Yes, you are rather heavy for a long journey," acknowledged the orc, "but you might eat one of those lavender berries and become so small I could carry you with ease." This quaint suggestion startled Trot, and she looked gravely at the speaker while she considered it. But Cap'n Bill gave a scornful snort and asked, "And what'd become of us afterward? We wouldn't be much good if we were 2 or 3 inches high. No, Mr. Orc, rather stay here as I am and be hopping my thumbs somewhere else." "Well, why couldn't you take some of the dark purple berries along with you? Eat after we finish and reach our destination," inquired the orc. "Then you grow big again whenever you pleased." Trot clapped her hands with delight. "That's it!" she exclaimed. "Oh, let's do it, Cap'n Bill." The old sailor did not like the idea at first, but he thought it over carefully, and the more he thought, the better it seemed. "How could you manage to carry us if we were so small?" he asked. "I could put you in a paper bag, tie you around my neck." "But we haven't any paper bag," objected Trot. The orc looked at her. "There's your sunbonnet," it said presently, "which is hollow in the middle and has 2 strings you could tie around my neck." Trot took off her sunbonnet and regarded it critically. Yes, it might easily hold both her and Cap'n Bill after they'd eaten the lavender berries and been reduced in size. She tied the strings around the orc's neck, and the sunbonnet made a bag in which 2 tiny people might ride without danger of falling out. So she said, "I believe we'll do it that way, Captain." Captain Bill groaned, but could make no logical objection, except that the plan seemed to him quite dangerous, and dangerous in more ways than one. "Well, I think so myself," said Trot soberly, "but nobody can stay alive without getting into danger sometimes, and danger doesn't mean getting hurt. Captain, it only means we might get hurt, so I guess we'll take the risk." "Let's go and find the berries," said the orc. They said nothing to Pessum, who was sitting on a stool and scowling dismally as he stared at the ocean, but started at once to seek the trees that bore the magic fruits. The orc remembered very well where the lavender fruits grew, and led his companions quickly to the spot. Captain Bill gathered 2 berries and placed them carefully in his pocket. Then they went around to the east side of the island and found the tree that bore the dark purple berries. "I guess I'll take 4 of these," said the sailor man, "so in case one doesn't make us grow big, we can eat another." "Better take 6, advised the orc. "It's well to be on the safe side, and I'm sure these trees grow nowhere else in all the world." So Captain Bill gathered 6 of the purple berries, and with their precious fruit they returned to the shed, bid goodbye to Pessum. Perhaps they would not have granted the surly little man this courtesy had they not wished to use him to tie the sunbonnet around the orc's neck. When Pessum learned they were about to leave him, at first he looked greatly pleased, but he suddenly recollected that nothing ought to please him, and so he began to grumble about being left alone. "Well, we knew it wouldn't suit you," remarked Captain Bill. "Didn't suit you to have us here, it won't suit you to have us go away." "Well, that's quite true," admitted Pessum. "I haven't been suited since I can remember, so it doesn't matter to me in the least whether you go or stay." He was interested in their experiment, however, and willingly agreed to assist, although he prophesied they would fall out of the sunbonnet on their way and be either drowned in the ocean or crushed upon some rocky shore. This uncheerful prospect did not daunt Trot, but it made Captain Bill quite nervous. "Well, I'll eat my berry first," said Trot, as she placed her sunbonnet on the ground in such manner that they could get into it. Then she ate the lavender berry, and in a few seconds became so small that Captain Bill picked her up gently with his thumb and one finger and placed her in the middle of the sunbonnet. Then he placed beside her the 6 purple berries, each one being about as big as Tiny Trot's head. And all preparations now being made, the old sailor ate his lavender berry and became very small, wooden leg and all. Captain Bill stumbled sadly in trying to climb over the edge of the sunbonnet, and pitched in beside Trot head first, which caused the unhappy Pessum to laugh with glee. Then the king of the island picked up the sunbonnet, so rudely that he shook its occupants like peas in a pod, and tied it by means of its strings securely around the orc's neck. "Well, I hope, Trot, you sewed those strings on tight," said Captain Bill anxiously. "We're not very heavy, you know," she replied, "so I think the stitches will hold. But be careful and not crush the berries, Captain." "Well, one's jammed already," he said, looking at him. "Already?" asked the orc. "Yes," they cried together, and Pessum came close to the sunbonnet and called to them, "You'll be smashed or drowned, I'm sure you will, but farewell and good riddance to you." The orc was provoked by this unkind speech, so he turned his tail toward the little man, made it revolve so fast the rush of air tumbled Pessum over backward, and he rolled several times upon the ground before he could stop himself and sit up. By that time the orc was high in the air and speeding swiftly over the ocean. And that is the end of Chapter 5, The Little Old Man of the Island. What was it called?
Yeah, I think I was
The Little Old Man of the Island. Chapter 6, oh goodness. The name of Chapter 6 would be considered offensive today if it was written. Chapter 6, tomorrow night we're going to read Chapter 6, The Flight of the Midgets. I do hope you'll join us tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, right here, Facebook Live. Good night, everyone.